I'm Julie Herman of J Brick Quilts and Lazy Girl Designs, and welcome back to the Lazy Angle Basics series. This week we're working on Hugs and Kisses, and this is the second video. In the first video, I showed you how to strip piece your pieces together, cut your A's and B's, and turn them into blocks. And now we're going to turn those Lazy Angle blocks into Hugs and Kisses blocks. So let's get started. Hugs and Kisses. Why is it called Hugs and Kisses? Well, it's because X's and O's. So when the whole quilt is together, you have O's and you have X's. And those blocks are assembled as X's and partial X's, and then those are put together. And the directions for what I'm going to show you now are on page 8 of your pattern. So you want to lay out your quilt. You can lay out your entire quilt, or you can just make your blocks as you go. My only rule to myself when I'm laying out my quilt, because this is scrappy, is I try not to put the same fabric directly next to each other. So I wouldn't want this one touching this one. But if they're one away, that's okay with me. Depending on how many fabrics you have used and what your preference is will determine what you're comfortable with. Once you have everything laid out and you know where your X's are going to be, the first step is we're going to sew these two together and these two together. And this step itself is not that hard. We want to do our best to line this up when we're at our machine and keep it so that you have those straight lines. Then we are going to sew these together. And when we're doing that, we're just going to try and keep these seams and the center seam on top of each other. So let's head on over to the machine to see what that looks like. I'm over here at my machine, and I'm going to begin by piecing these two together. So I'm going to slide these out of the way and bring these two over. And if you would like to pin here, you can go ahead. I feel good enough eyeballing it, but if pinning helps you, go for it. I like to line up my first seam and then begin sewing, and sometimes one piece is longer than the other. I'm more concerned with where they line up here. And so I'm gonna just begin there. And you don't need a back stitch at the beginning of the end unless this is a block in your first or last row. If it's in your first or last row, it can be helpful to back stitch since this is a borderless quilt. And now I'm gonna slide these two over, and I'm just gonna chain piece. That way I keep these together and I won't mix up which pieces go with which X. Make sure none of my seams flip. So there we go, we have those sewn. And normally this is where I would head over to my iron. But what I'm going to do is I am going to finger press here at the machine so that I can keep going. And I'm going to go ahead and iron this open and this open when I'm totally done. A helpful tool for this part is the Violet Craft seam roller. It really helps to lay and keep things nice and flat. Now I don't need the whole thing open right now because I'm just worried about where I'm sewing. So you can just open as much as you need. Go ahead and snip that so it doesn't get caught on my presser foot. And now I'm going to sew these together. And at this stage, I'm not worried about points yet. Those are all my four corners, and I'm going to be worried about them when I begin to sew my blocks together, which I'll show you in just a moment. So I'm just checking all my intersections as I go, doing my best to keep them lined up. My seam flipped underneath there, just fix that. And this is a good chance to use my stiletto if you feel like that will help you keep everything nice and lined up. All right, now that I have this piece, I'm going to head over to my iron to press all of these seams open. And again, remember to press, not iron, so that we don't stretch any of our bias here that we are working with. I've gone ahead and pieced together a couple of my blocks, and now it is time to put my blocks together. And this is where I'm going to begin to have points that I want to worry about not losing in my quilt. So when I place my blocks right sides together, I want to do my best to put these two angled lines on top of each other and sew my 1/4 inch so that I land right there. And that way, when I sew my rows together, I still have my points. So if you make a mistake at this point, it is still something we can fix, and depending on what it is, you either take it out or we can accommodate it with our seam when we're doing our rows. But I'm just going to slowly start, and then I'm going to do my best to get things lined up here, but honestly, As long as your background is all one color, which it should be, it doesn't really matter that that is perfectly together because nobody's eye is ever going to zoom in on that. People's eyes are naturally going to go to where your points are. So now I'm going to work on getting this one lined up as well. So let's see what that looks like. So that is what that looks like. So now I have my 1/4 inch so that when I sew my rows together, I still have my nice white point there. And same thing on this end, I have my 1/4 inch. So I am going to continue to sew my blocks together into rows, and then I'll be back in just a moment to show you how we put our rows together. Now that we have sewn our blocks into rows, it's time to sew those rows together to complete our quilt top. And what we really want to do is make sure that we protect these points. We don't want to cut them off because it'll really detract from the design, and we've worked so hard up until now to keep them. So that's the final step we need to do. So when we get to the machine, I'm going to first sew these 3 with this piece on top. Then I'm going to stop and I'm going to sew these 4 points, and I'm just going to do about 1 inch each time. And then I'm going to open it up. I'm going to check all the locations, and if everything's good, then I'm going to sew the length of the entire seam. And I'm going to repeat that process for all of my horizontal seams. So let's head on over to the sewing machine and I'll show you what that looks like. I have my first 2 rows, right sides together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place them together. You can pin them if you'd like. And I'm going to make sure that this is lined up exactly on top of this seam between the green and the purple. And then I am just going to sew about 1/2 inch on either side, landing right at that point, so that I'm basically using my thread to kind of pin this perfectly in place. And then I'm going to stop. So I have about 1 inch. And then I'm going to skip this one because I'm going to sew this one from the other side. And I'm going to move to my next point that I can see on this side. And again, I'm going to line it up right on top of here. And I'm more concerned right now with getting my needle in where my point is rather than getting the 2 pieces exactly on top. If one is more scant than the other, that's okay. At this point, I'm just concerned with doing whatever accommodations I need so that I get my points to line up. So again, gonna line that up. And you can see here that the pink is kind of poking out a little more. That's okay. What's important is that my points are right on top of my vertical seam. And I could check those 3 now, or I could wait till I have my other 4 done. I'm just gonna check those real quick. That looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. And so does that. And so now I'm going to take the entire piece that I just was sewing this way and flip it over so that I have the other points exposed. And so at the beginning and the end, I just have 1/2 a point because it is the half blocks. So I am going to, I can just really do this one when I get to sewing the whole piece. So I'm going to focus on my middle ones right now. And then move down to my next one. And this is a perfect example. This was not perfectly pieced when I put these 2 together. So you can see that my lighter pink point is definitely lower than my darker pink one here. So I have 2 choices. I could take this apart and fix it, or I can just decide that I'm okay with it and sew it in like this so that I don't lose my point over here. Because if I sewed it all the way down to this one, it would end up with a blunt point, and I think that would look worse. So I am just going to try and line it up with my outer point. This is definitely a time to go slow and use your stiletto if needed. And you can sew those half points now if you'd like, or you can do them when you sew the length of the whole piece. So now I'm going to open this up and Make sure that the points that I just sewed look good. And so here's that purple one I was talking about. So you can see that one just kind of goes in a little bit above. It's not even an eighth. It's about between an eighth and a 16th. But this one is perfect. So now that I have all of that, I can sew the length of my piece and be confident that all of my points are exactly where I want to. And when I come close to each intersection, I'm just going to make sure that I stitch directly on top of the stitching that I've already done. So since there's no borders, I am going to backstitch the beginning and end of this full length of this border. Slow down here as I get to my stitching and just stitch right on top of the stitching, because I can't see my point. It's on my underneath piece here, but I can trust that I'm where I want to be because I already put that stitching in place. And so at this point I have no pins. My stitching that I just did is counting as my pins. Now that I've sewn the length of the seam, I've gone ahead and backstitched, and I'm going to repeat those steps to sew all of my rows together. Thank you so much for joining me here for the Hugs and Kisses quilt. I hope you have enjoyed the process of making strip-pieced Lazy Angle blocks, and that you're really beginning to see there's just such an unlimited possibility of blocks that can be made from one amazing ruler. So if you enjoyed this series, please be sure to like this video, leave a comment for us, and subscribe to the channel. And if you've not yet signed up for the sew along emails, you can do so at the link posted in the video description below. If you've missed any of the previous videos, you can go ahead and look at the playlist. We did 5 different projects during this sew along, and coming up soon we'll be working on Cuppa Tea. We'll have more information about that soon, so please make sure to subscribe to the channel and to sign up for our emails so you don't miss anything. Thanks again for joining us, and I'll see you back here again soon.